Know that minarchist who defends the minimal state is not on the side of liberty. It is very likely that you have a friend who considers the state inefficient but a necessary evil. Therefore, he defends the so-called minimal state, whatever that may be. He calls himself a minarchist. At first, we might consider him an ally in our crusade against the Leviathan. However, a deeper analysis shows that no, he is not our ally. On the contrary, he is one of our main enemies. And why? Well, that is what I will attempt to explain here in this video, arguing from a libertarian point of view, according to which our greatest problem in social organization is not the size of the state, but its very existence. This criticism is based on the ethical principle of non-aggression, which states that no person or institution may initiate violence, and that is exactly what the state does. Minarchists defend the so-called minimal state, that is, a reduced form of the state whose main role would be to provide security, policing, courts, and defense against aggression and fraud. Some minarchists also include other areas, such as health and education. They maintain that such functions are necessary to protect individual rights such as contractual freedom and property, as well as to ensure a minimum quality of life. Unlike anarchists who defend the complete elimination of the state, minarchists believe that some forms of state authority are inevitable or even justifiable in order to prevent social conflicts and protect people and property. However, this defense of the legalized monopoly of force is precisely what libertarians deeply question. Let us see why. As Mises explained to us, socialism is central planning, which can only be implemented if there is an institution that monopolizes the use of force. That is, that compels the citizens under its rule to do what has been determined by the so-called authorities. That institution is the state. Therefore, if there is a state, there is socialism. The minarchist accepts such an institution whose essence is coercive even if in reduced form. He accepts the whipping, even if in smaller number and intensity. Thus, minarchism is nothing more than one of the 50 shades of socialism, the one that wears a friendly mask but still holds the whip in its hand. In the minarchist discourse, by restricting the size and scope of the Leviathan, it is emphasized that it is a necessary evil. For us libertarians, however, such a distinction is illusory and will exact its price later. The main criticism of minarchism begins with a very simple analogy. If some toxic object causes harm, no matter how small it is, its mere presence is already harmful. In this way, reducing the Leviathan to a supposedly minimal version does not change its nature. It still has exclusive authority to legislate, apply, and enforce laws through force. Imagine a doctor operating on a patient with a tumor. Would it make sense for the doctor to remove only part of the tumor instead of removing it completely? No, right? A tumor, even if reduced, is still a tumor, isn't it? Very well, reducing the size of the state is like replacing a greater evil with a lesser one. It will still be an evil. And here comes another problem. Who guarantees that this minimal state will remain minimal? Popular wisdom already correctly teaches us that a gate wide enough for one ox is wide enough for the whole herd. Likewise, if we accept state coercion even in a mild form at first, there is no logical reason to expect that it will not increase over time. There is no way around it. Once the gate is opened, it is only a matter of time before the whole herd passes through. Minarchists believe that limiting the state to functions they consider essential guarantees that it will not become abusive or indefinitely expand its coercive power. They believe that constitutional institutions and a system of checks and balances will be able to contain the monster. How naive! This belief is logically and historically unfounded. States, even if initially lean, grow and expand social control to the core. For us libertarians, the criticism of minarchism is not only pragmatic, but also ethical. This institution called the state, by illegitimately claiming the monopoly of the use of force, is intrinsically a violator of the non-aggression principle. Even in the contradictory role of protector of rights, a minimal state still has the power to impose its legislation, collect taxes, and ultimately violate individual rights without the consent of those under its rule. The existence of this monopoly of force is incompatible with a civilized society, one based on the natural right to property and on voluntary interactions. Minarchists, for their part, must perform enormous mental contortions to say at the same time that the state is an evil yet necessary. They lack the courage to take the final and most important step. A central criticism is that minarchists cannot conceive of a functional social order without the presence of a state authority. By defending a minimal state to guarantee peace, justice, or the protection of rights, minarchists implicitly assume that only a centralized and coercive institution can fulfill this role. Only the state would be capable of resolving major conflicts. Look at that. The very institution that is the greatest source of conflict, since it is intrinsically the first to violate the self-ownership of the citizens under its dominion. That is why minarchists loudly proclaim that libertarianism is utopian. It is not. As Rothbard rightly said, it is the only ethical system compatible with human nature. In fact, utopian is believing that it is possible to give power to a small group and expect it not to abuse that power. The main libertarian criticism of minarchism is that it is a pseudo-solution, something that prevents or hinders the true solution. To illustrate this, I will cite an episode of the excellent series Breaking Bad entitled Half Measures. In it, there is a scene in which Mike Mantrout tells a story to Walter White. When Mike was a police officer, there was an alcoholic husband who constantly abused his wife. Mike knew it would not stop. He also knew the husband would not remain in jail. The only solution would have been to take him out. But he felt sorry and ended up giving only a warning. Later, it was the husband who took the wife out. Mike says he took a half measure instead of the full measure. Very well, in our case, minarchism is the half measure and libertarianism is the full measure. Thus, by offering citizens this pseudo-solution, this half measure, the illusory idea of a tiny, obedient little state that will remain in its corner, doing only what is expected of it, minarchists prevent many from seeing the true solution. The pure and simple removal of the tumor, the abolition of the monopoly of force, the extinction of the Leviathan. For this reason, minarchists are not only not on the side of liberty, they are its main enemies. No one believes in the state as much as minarchists do. Not even those radical leftists? Absolutely not. Those people correctly understand that the state is a coercive institution that must be seized in order to control the herd and take its resources for themselves. It is no accident that they sooner or later always end up returning to power. At this point, minarchists, in a fallacious appeal to authority, will shout, "Hey, but what about Mises? Didn't he defend the minimal state?" Yes, he did, and he was wrong about that. However, he also defended secession at the individual level, which in practice would allow any individual to rid himself of the Leviathan. But in short, minarchists, by accepting the necessity of an institution with a monopoly on the use of force, move toward the same ultimate goal as other forms of socialism, centralizing coercive power in an entity that imposes its will upon individuals. Minarchism prevents or delays those who have already realized the harm the state causes from taking the final and most important step. Only the total abolition of the state will truly allow us to be free.